At America's most elite shooting range, the old rifle Isabel Quinn carried looked painfully out of place, just like Isabel herself, with her silver hair, modest clothes, and quiet demeanor among a sea of tactical gear and gleaming weapons. Victor Lang, the powerful CEO watching her, smirked as whispers filled the room. She was the perfect target, the perfect joke. When they handed Isabel a sabotaged weapon and the cameras clicked into position, no one noticed how her hands moved with quiet precision, or how her sharp eyes scanned every angle with the calm, calculating focus of a seasoned operative. They couldn't know the truth hidden for decades, that Isabel Quinn had once been one of the most lethal snipers alive, her existence erased from the records of a covert unit known only to the highest levels of power. They thought they saw a frail old woman. But what they mocked was a ghost, and ghosts don't go down quietly. If you enjoy insightful stories about hidden strength and quiet heroes, be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's special episode will reveal even more of Isabel's incredible journey. At 62, Isabel Quinn lived a quiet and peaceful life. She was the owner of a small bookstore tucked away on the old streets of Mission District in San Francisco. The bookstore, with its smell of aged wood and the rustling sound of pages turning, seemed to be an extension of herself, simple, calm, and never ostentatious. One chilly afternoon, Isabel appeared at the Silverhawk Club, a place known as the sanctuary for the tech industry's wealthy elite. This shooting club was not only famous for its state-of-the-art facilities, but also for its eye-watering membership fee, $50,000 per member. It was a world of young, successful individuals draped in luxurious sportswear and speaking in the cold, detached language of technology. In that setting, Isabel stood out, not in the way people might have expected. She wore an old wool coat, wrapped in a hand-knit scarf that had frayed at the edges, and worn leather shoes with scuffed heels. She wasn't flustered. She walked through the temperature-check gate and received her guest pass with a faint smile, her dark brown eyes reflecting a calm serenity like a still, clear pond. However, her calmness only drew more attention from the crowd. The scrutinizing glances, the half-smirking laughs, sliced through the air like thin blades. "She's probably lost," a blond young man whispered, loud enough for her to hear. "Grandma's probably looking for a yoga class," a girl wearing a Gucci sports jacket chuckled. None of them knew who Isabel was, and none of them bothered to find out. To them, she was just an older woman out of place, a small blemish on the polished picture of Silverhawk Club. When she reached the reception desk, Isabel politely asked to join a trial session. The manager, a young guy named Tyler, stifled a shrug and handed her an old rifle carefully stored in the reserve locker, a World War II-era Springfield M1 Garand, instead of the sleek, high-tech laser assault rifles that the members usually used. "This might suit you better," Tyler said, his smile full of insinuation. Isabel took the old rifle as one would greet an old friend. Her hand glided along the stock, the smooth curves worn down by time. No objection, no look of resentment. Just a slight nod, as if everything unfolding was exactly what she'd expected. The entire club seemed to hold its breath in an odd, tense moment. They waited for a fumble, an awkward failure to unfold, something to entertain them on their dull afternoon. But Isabel only smiled quietly to herself because they didn't know, and they weren't ready to know. Isabel stood there, one hand gently cradling the time-worn Springfield M1 Garand. The cold, white LED lights of Silverhawk Club reflected off the glossy concrete floor, casting an almost surreal image of her, out of place, classic, yet carrying an odd weight. She stepped up to the shooting platform. A ripple of laughter rose from the bleachers, where the young members, arms crossed, waited to see a pitiful performance. "Be careful, Grandma," someone teased. "Hope you remember how to release the safety," another shouted, and the group burst into laughter. Isabel didn't respond. She simply adjusted the sling, checked the ancient sight with a smoothness that was almost imperceptible. A brief glance flashed across the targets more than 100 meters away, all equipped with cutting-edge electronic sensors. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing like flowing water. Then, bang! The shot rang out, crisp and precise. On the electronic screen above, a bright red mark appeared right at the center of target number 1. Bullseye. The entire hall froze. The laughter died in their throats. Isabel didn't stop. She reloaded smoothly, as if her body had programmed the motion long ago. Bang! Another shot. Another red mark, precise to the millimeter, placed perfectly on the first one. Then one more round, and another. 5 shots. 5 perfect hits. No error. The room fell silent. The only sound was the sharpness of their breath. Tyler, the young manager, stared wide-eyed, instinctively taking half a step back. The screen flickered, continuously flashing a warning. Target overload. System check required. But Isabel wasn't done. She signaled for the technician to set up 3 thin bulletproof glass panels, a challenge designed for the top-tier shooters. The crowd began to murmur again, this time with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Isabel aimed lightly, adjusting her angle. A nearly imperceptible movement. Bang! The first bullet ricocheted off the first glass panel, changing its angle like a marble, then slammed into the second panel, then bounced off the third, finally embedding itself straight into the center of target number 6. The crowd held their breath. The electronic sensors were confused, taking nearly 3 seconds to register the trajectory of the bullet. An impossible arc. Stunned. Dumbfounded. Some people jumped out of their seats, their phones secretly raised, trying to capture this strange moment. An old shooter with an old gun had just pulled off a shot that even the youngest marksman with the most advanced weapons would hesitate to attempt. In the middle of the shooting range, Isabel simply smiled softly. A calm, subtle smile shining in the silver-white light. No pride, no challenge, just as if she had been shooting like that all her life. But for all the stunned people standing there, for the first time they understood. The simple woman before them was anything but simple. While most of the crowd at Silverhawk Club remained stunned by the astounding display, one person felt a growing sense of unease. Charlotte Quinn, Isabel's only granddaughter, sat quietly in the corner of the room. As a data engineer at a large tech company in San Francisco, Charlotte had a habit of never trusting what she saw at face value. Her eyes followed Isabel as she gently returned the old rifle to the counter, still maintaining the calm demeanor as though shooting through 3 layers of glass was just an everyday occurrence. Charlotte furrowed her brows. For years, she had always thought of Isabel as just the owner of a small bookstore, someone who loved herbal tea and classic novels. A simple person, occasionally a bit eccentric, but entirely harmless. But those shots, the almost inhuman accuracy, the cold, calm demeanor, couldn't just be casual shooting skills. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. That night, after Isabel had retired to her room, Charlotte sat by her laptop, the cold blue light of the screen reflecting on her thoughtful face. She began to search. Isabel Quinn plus military. Isabel Quinn plus service record. Every possible variation she could think of. But the strange thing was, there was nothing. Not a single line mentioning Isabel's military service, any training, or even amateur shooting competitions. Ridiculous, Charlotte whispered. Such a skill couldn't just fall from the sky. She changed tactics, accessing some old military databases she'd used in past data recovery projects. After several hours of searching, Charlotte found a strange clue, a file marked Quinn I, originally in the military system from the 1980s, but later completely erased around 2003. No reason. No confirmation documents. A ghost file, exactly the type of records intentionally wiped from history. Charlotte's heart began to race. She carefully traced deeper into the auxiliary records, the fragments of data that the main system had missed. In a dark corner of the server, she came across a simple note. Project Orion, subject, whisper. Whisper? Charlotte shuddered. As a child, she remembered Isabel telling her bedtime stories. In those stories, there was always a mysterious character named Whisper, a silent shadow, unseen, unheard, but always saving people in times of danger. Back then, she'd thought her grandmother was just making up stories for fun, but now the word whisper appeared in a top-secret military document. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. A question was forming in her mind, clear and undeniable. Who exactly is Isabel? Charlotte couldn't sleep that night. The scattered lines of data, the fragments of a buried truth, lingered in her mind like incomplete puzzle pieces. She decided to dig deeper, despite having to navigate through the old but stubborn security layers, as if the people who created them had predicted that one day someone would search through them. After several hours of typing away in the dark room, Charlotte finally stumbled upon a strange phrase. Shadow Phoenix. From the moment she saw the name, a cold chill ran down her spine. Shadow Phoenix. It sounded like something straight out of the spy thrillers Isabel often sold in her bookstore. But no, this was something very real. According to the fragmented documents she pieced together, Shadow Phoenix was a top-secret special operations unit established in the late 1970s. Their mission: to carry out operations the government would never publicly acknowledge. Assassinations, rescues, recovering sensitive information, destroying enemy infrastructure. And the selection criteria? It wasn't based on impressive resumes or legendary achievements. They only chose people the world barely knew. Ghosts in everyday life. Orphans, immigrants, those living on the fringes of society. People who, if they disappeared, no one would ask questions. And in the initial list, Charlotte found a familiar name: Quinn, Isabel M. Next to it was a brief description: sniper. Rating: above standard, alias Whisper. Charlotte suddenly remembered the afternoon spent in the bookstore, watching Isabel patiently stack old books, her thin hands steady as rocks. She had never imagined those hands had once held a sniper rifle, had once ended battles in silence. A new question flashed through Charlotte's mind, sharp as an arrow. If Shadow Phoenix was a secret unit so classified that the government wouldn't even acknowledge it, and if Isabel had been part of it, then why had she lived in peace all these years in the heart of bustling San Francisco? Or, Charlotte shuddered, perhaps that peaceful life was just the surface. Maybe. The shadows of the past were still silently following them. The laptop screen flickered with pale light. In one final file, she read a recent update. Old target, Whisper, marked for surveillance. Request reactivation of Hunter Protocol. Hunter Protocol? Charlotte hastily shut the laptop, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to talk to Isabel right away, before the shadows in the dark found them once again. A week after the performance that shook the Silverhawk Club, rumors about the bookstore owner who shot perfect bullseyes spread like wildfire through the wealthy tech circles of San Francisco. Sitting in the glass office on the highest floor of the club, Victor Lang, president of Silverhawk Club and CEO of the defense conglomerate Aegis Dynamics, sipped his whiskey while watching social media posts about Isabel Quinn. A faint smile passed over his lips. "That old sniper thinks she can mock us?" Victor muttered, then pressed a button to call his assistant in. Within hours, Silverhawk's expanded shooting competition was announced. The media campaign was ramped up, celebrating talent, embracing technology, grandiose slogans with a much more subtle real agenda, to turn Isabel into a public joke. Victor knew how to exploit the crowd. Everyone loves watching idols fall, especially in front of the press, defense investors, and the tech moguls, hungry for new weapons. The plan was crystal clear. Isabel would be invited as an honored guest, a gesture that sounded polite, a tribute to the previous generation, but in reality, it was a meticulously designed trap. Isabel would be forced to use an unfamiliar weapon, an integrated AI assault rifle, which required complex machine-to-machine communication that her generation was not accustomed to. The match would be staged to favor the younger shooters, especially those who had trained with the new technology. The shooting scenarios would be designed to be complicated, with a short time frame and extreme pressure, all aimed at making Isabel make a mistake in front of the cameras. Victor had even personally selected the accidental opponent who would face Isabel, confident, youthful marksmen who had been secretly trained to make her look foolish. To cover any potential mishaps, the technical team had subtly adjusted the sensitivity of the AI rifle Isabel would use. Just a slight delay in response, a tiny deviation in direction, enough to turn a legendary marksman into a clumsy old woman in front of the crowd. When the final details had been planned, Victor crossed his arms and gazed out the window at the city lights. In his mind, this match wasn't just about humiliating an individual. It was a message to those who once belonged to a bygone era. The world now belongs to technology. People like Isabel Quinn are nothing more than relics, and if she were accidentally embarrassed to the point of having to retreat completely from the spotlight, good. That way, there would be no need to worry about the dangerous past she carried with her. When the event date was set, the invitations sent out, Victor leaned back in his chair, a cold smile widening across his face. The arena was ready. Now all that was left was to wait for the old phoenix to burn its wings. The evening before the tournament, Isabel Quinn sat alone in the small room behind her old bookstore. The soft, yellow light cast upon the dusty shelves, reflecting on an old photo placed on the table, a black and white picture, its edges frayed, showing Isabel in a military uniform that few knew she had ever worn. She stared at the invitation to the tournament that had been hand-delivered, elegant yet pompous, along with a letter signed by Victor Lang. "It is our honor to invite Miss Quinn to become a model for the next generation of marksmen." Isabel smirked, a cheap trap wrapped in flowery words. But throughout her life in the darkest operations of Shadow Phoenix, Isabel had learned one lesson. The true enemy never just wants to humiliate you. They want to erase you, without anyone asking questions. The public slip-up was just the surface. Victor Lang's real goal was to erase every trace of Isabel's past, the past that could expose the covert operations that had once involved him. In the classified files Charlotte had just found, there were familiar names, forbidden operations, missions Isabel and her team had carried out to save lives that the government had left behind. And behind that cover-up was Victor, who had once been a young intelligence officer, orchestrating under-the-table deals. If this truth comes out, the tech defense empire that Victor is building will collapse like a sandcastle before a raging wave. And Isabel? She's not just a witness, she's the living nightmare that Victor must eliminate. That shooting competition was just the beginning. Once Isabel's reputation is destroyed, once she's labeled as an old fool, a self-deceived legend, no one will believe her anymore. Then a small accident, a reasonable disappearance. No one will investigate. Isabel took a deep breath, her eyes sharp as razors beneath her silver lashes. She had fought against enemies more dangerous than Victor Lang. She knew. To survive, she had to make the enemy think she was walking straight into their trap. She picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number she hadn't used in years. On the other end, a low voice came through. "I've been waiting for this call, Whisper." Whisper? The name Isabel thought she had buried along with Shadow Phoenix. She chuckled softly. "It's time for the biggest performance of my life." San Francisco was swallowed by the damp night as Isabel and Charlotte quietly left the city. No warning, no trace. Just an old car, a worn paper map, and high alert. Something Isabel had never let go of, even after all these years. Charlotte drove, occasionally glancing at her grandmother through the rearview mirror. She had long known that her grandmother was no ordinary woman, but she had never imagined that behind that quiet exterior lay such a fierce past. The map guided them north through dense forests and empty highways. Eventually they stopped in a small town near the Oregon border, a place that didn't appear on modern maps, where only the dead came. That remote town, Cedar Hollow, looked like a scene frozen in time. Faded wooden storefronts, an old gas station, a small diner, always smelling of baked goods and burnt coffee. It didn't attract tourists. No one asked too many questions. Exactly the kind of place where ghosts chose to hide. Isabel stopped in front of an old auto repair shop, the sign Rusty's Garage swaying in the wind. She walked in, tapping 3 times in a familiar rhythm on the greasy countertop. A man with graying hair, broad shoulders like a bear, looked up. When his eyes met Isabel's, a slow half-smile appeared. "I thought you had become a legend, Whisper," he muttered, wiping his hands on the old oil rag. "Rusty. I need the team," Isabel replied, her gaze as sharp as the years that hadn't passed. Soon after, in a small room behind the warehouse, 7 people gathered around a rough wooden table. All of them had once been members of Shadow Phoenix, names the world believed had died in non-existent missions. Rusty, the mechanical expert and weapons manufacturer. Maria Moth Vasquez, the master of stealth and reconnaissance. Jonah Crow Delaney, the marksman who had taken out targets at record distances. And 3 others, each carrying scars that ran deeper than just skin. Charlotte observed, sensing the invisible bond that tied these people together, a bond both of camaraderie and shared pain for what they had sacrificed. Isabel wasted no time on flowery words. She spread the map in front of them, pointing to San Francisco. "Victor Lang is wiping out all traces. He's never forgotten us, and this time he has technology, money, and mercenaries." A heavy silence enveloped the room. Finally, Crow spoke, his voice gravelly. We disappeared once, but if we don't stand up this time, everything we've sacrificed will truly be erased. Each nod was weighed down with resolve. They weren't standing up just for Isabel. They were standing up for their own existence. The war had never ended. It had only just begun again, this time in deeper shadows with a more dangerous enemy. And Isabel knew to win, she would have to play the final game on the very stage that Victor Lang had set up. Not long after Isabel and the Shadow Phoenix team reunited, the first signs of the hunt began to appear. Shiny black SUVs lingered at the edge of town. Strange figures in the diner sweated beneath their thick coats. No one needed to say anything. They all understood. Victor Lang had begun to act. Isabel made a quick decision. Leave Cedar Hollow, move deeper into Nevada, where the terrain was treacherous and communication signals were weak. The farther they were from technology, the better their chances of survival. The small convoy wound its way through rugged dirt roads, crossing deep ravines and barren, desolate fields. Each wheel ground the red dust beneath them. Isabel looked up at the deep blue sky above, knowing that the predators were closing in by the hour. That night, while camping in the pine forest, Charlotte sat near the fire, hugging her knees, her eyes uneasy. She had never faced danger like this, not in a world of data, code, or algorithms. Here, every mistake came at the cost of blood. Isabel walked over and placed a lightweight handgun beside her. "We don't have time, Charlotte," she said, her voice calm, as if she were teaching her how to brew tea. All through the night, Isabel taught Charlotte how to hold the gun, how to feel the rhythm of her breath, how to see the enemy before the enemy saw her. No unnecessary theories, just survival lessons honed over decades on the battlefield. "Don't think about shooting. Think about surviving," Isabel whispered, gently squeezing the young woman's shoulder. By dawn, when the fog still hung thick in the valley, the roar of engines shattered the silence. 3 SUVs came charging, dust swirling behind them. "They're here!" Rusty yelled, pulling a homemade shotgun from the back of the truck. Isabel signaled for everyone to split up, Crow and Moth to take the high ground, Isabel and Charlotte to circle down into the ravine. The gunfight erupted fiercely, the sounds of gunfire echoing off the cliffs, creating a deadly symphony. Charlotte crouched behind a boulder, her hands trembling as she held the gun. A mercenary charged at her, roaring like a wild animal. In an instant, all the lessons from the night before flooded back. She pulled the trigger. The shot rang out sharply. The mercenary fell. Charlotte gasped for breath, her whole body shaking, but her eyes were different now. Something had awakened in her, a raw, powerful survival instinct. Isabel, from a distance, saw it all. She nodded, her gaze briefly tinged with sadness. She knew the price of survival wasn't just blood. It was the loss of a part of the soul. The gunfight raged on, intense. A small group from Shadow Phoenix overwhelmed the mercenaries with guerrilla tactics, using the rough terrain to their advantage. But Isabel knew this was just the beginning. Victor wouldn't stop. And next time, he would be stronger, more ruthless. Amid the smoldering wreckage of the vehicles and the acrid smell of gunpowder, Isabel gripped Charlotte's hand tightly. "We're going to have to go even further," she whispered. This was no longer just her fight. It had become a battle to protect Charlotte's future and the truth that was being buried. On the gray afternoon, as the group was camping on the outskirts of an abandoned town, a lone figure on a motorcycle appeared on the dusty horizon. Isabel, standing guard from a distance, recognized the figure immediately, determined, silent, as if one with the earth and sky. "Crow," she whispered, her eyes flashing with a mix of relief and caution. Lone Crow, the legendary leader of the Shadow Phoenix unit, was much older now. His hair was streaked with gray, his face marked by deep wrinkles. But his eyes were still as sharp as the blade that had once led them through nameless battlefields. Crow dismounted, tossing his dusty helmet onto the seat without a word of greeting. His gaze swept over the familiar faces, lingering longer on Charlotte, as if measuring the weight of the future in a single look. "We need to talk immediately." His voice was deep and heavy. They gathered around the fire, the flickering flames casting their shadows on the rotting walls. Crow pulled out a worn file wrapped in yellowed oilcloth. Inside were photographs, classified reports, and a truth never before revealed. "Victor Lang," Crow began, "he's not just a weapons dealer. He was once one of us, one of the first ghosts of Shadow Phoenix." The air grew heavier. Isabel clenched her fists, her knuckles white. Our final operation in Ashera, we didn't fail because the enemy was stronger. Crow looked at each of them, his voice scraping against their memories. We failed because we were betrayed from within. Charlotte frowned. You're saying Victor betrayed Shadow Phoenix? Crow nodded slowly. During that final operation, when the unit was carrying out a mission to rescue hostages from an illegal armed group, Victor had secretly given their position to the enemy in exchange for a lucrative weapons contract with that same organization. The cost of that betrayal was the death of half of Shadow Phoenix and the erasure of their names from every military record. Victor vanished, creating the image of a successful businessman, while the blood of their fallen brothers stained the pages of history that were buried. Isabel closed her eyes, the memory of that day flooding back like a cold blade cutting into her heart. She remembered the screams, the faces falling in the hail of bullets, and the helplessness as they were hunted down like prey in a carefully orchestrated hunt. Now, he wants to erase the rest of us, Crow said, his voice lower, so that the past can never rise again. Isabel opened her eyes, silently squeezing Charlotte's hand. It was no longer just about survival. This was a reckoning, a blood debt, an unavoidable confrontation. As the night fell heavy over the desert, the fires within them burned fiercer than ever. The real war had only just begun. The day Isabel decided to confront Victor publicly, San Francisco was shrouded in thick fog, as if the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation. She knew this was no longer a battle for survival, but a fight to reclaim the honor of those who had fallen, and for the truth that had been buried for so many years. With the support of Lone Crow, Charlotte, and the surviving members of Shadow Phoenix, Isabel began the counterattack. They split into 3 groups, one to infiltrate the Silverhawk Club's data system, one to secretly plant information in major media channels, and one, Isabel and Charlotte, to prepare for their public appearance. Charlotte had found a way to decrypt the remaining classified documents about Shadow Phoenix, including mission reports, missing person files, and even evidence of Victor's betrayal. These data, released simultaneously with Victor's grand unveiling of his latest AI weapon at the Silverhawk Club, would create an unstoppable shockwave. The ceremony was lavish, the lights dazzling, the applause ringing as Victor was hailed as the hero of the age. But just as Victor was proudly lecturing about the era of clean warfare led by his technology, the giant screen behind him suddenly flickered. Instead of the glossy promotional footage, real images appeared. The scene of Shadow Phoenix soldiers being ambushed, witness testimonies, documents of covert dealings. And finally, Victor's youthful face, shaking hands with the enemy to trade the lives of his comrades for his own survival. The entire hall fell silent. Isabel, dressed in a simple gray coat, stepped onto the stage. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice was deep and resonant, like the beating drum of ancient souls. I am Isabel Quinn, Shadow 03. We were once considered ghosts, fighting with no name, no medals, no recognition. We lost comrades, lost our past, and lost our voice. Today, I stand here to demand justice, not only for us, but for the truth. Victor's security forces rushed forward, but Crow and the others skillfully blocked them. Hundreds of reporters present at the event immediately began filming, broadcasting live around the world. Victor Lang, his face pale, tried to deny everything, but it was too late. A series of official investigations were launched, the defense company's stock plummeted, and Victor was charged with treason and defense fraud, a sentence he couldn't avoid. Weeks later, Isabel stood in front of her small bookstore, holding the old journal once again. Charlotte stood beside her, smiling. No longer the shy data engineer, but a true warrior. On the cover of the journal, Isabel wrote one more line. For those who were once forced to stay silent, now we have been heard. She looked up at the light gray sky, as if seeing the figures of her old comrades smiling down at her. Finally, the past had been brought into the light. Finally, the forgotten names were etched into history.
There are some stories, my dear, that it takes a lifetime for someone to gather the courage to tell. The story of Isabel Quinn is one of those stories. I still remember that morning when she stood in front of her little bookstore, the wind howling, carrying the scent of dry grass from the distant pier. She wore a faded gray coat, holding an old journal in her hands, each page soaked with the sweat and blood of days without names or time. As people passed by, some recognized her from the shocking news reports from weeks earlier. But Isabel wasn't proud, nor was she bitter. She simply stood there, smiling faintly, the kind of smile worn by those who've lived through the world, lost, hurt, and in the end, still chose to forgive it all. They asked her if she regretted it, exposing the past, reopening the wounds that everyone tried to forget. Isabel just shook her head gently. "There are some truths," she said, her voice as deep as a mountain's echo, "that if we don't dare speak, they will continue to bury the best souls under the ashes of lies, and we will lose ourselves." That evening, under the awning of the bookstore, Charlotte, the little granddaughter from days gone by, sat reading to her the messages sent from all over the world. Those who carried old wounds, families who lost loved ones with no explanation, those who quietly bore injustice, all sent simple yet profoundly heartfelt messages of thanks. Isabel Quinn didn't just reclaim her honor. She had lit a lamp for the silent souls, so they would know that no matter how much time passes, there would come a day when the light would find them. And I, Miss Ellie, sit here telling this story to you all as a gentle reminder. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't appear to the sound of heroic music, but in the quiet, steady footsteps. Footsteps that walk through a lifetime simply to protect one simple thing: the truth.